Captain Vex Harland had seen enough floating rocks in space to fill a million boring textbooks, but even he had to admit, the one they were approaching now invade. That's right, tried. Turns out, if there's one thing humans excel at, it's making a mess that no one else can handle. Not even a highly advanced alien race with a penchant for planetary subjugation could manage the chaos Earthlings called home. Commander Briston, known affectionately among his crew as that sarcastic bastard, stood on the bridge of the UHS Defiant. He was staring at the holographic map of the solar system, a mess of neon lines and blinking dots, like a teenager's bedroom wall on Holo Night. "Well," he said, scratching the stubble on his chin, "if that isn't a sight as welcoming as a punch in the groin." Lieutenant Corbin, his ever-optimistic second-in-command, piped up with his usual cheer. "At least they're gone, sir." Briston shot him a look that could have stung a scorpion. "Gone, Corbin. They're not gone. They're lurking out there, licking their wounds and planning their next grandiose attempt at getting their tentacles on our shitty little planet. You really think they'll try again?" "Oh, definitely. Because if there's one thing the Zorathians love more than conquering, it's screwing up and trying it again anyway." Briston turned back to the display. Besides, who wouldn't want a piece of this interstellar highway to hell? Meanwhile, in the cramped belly of the ship's research deck, Lyra was knee-deep in Zorathian cultural artifacts, or as she liked to call them, alien knickknacks. As the ship's cultural anthropologist, her job was to make sense of why the Zorathians were so fascinated by Earth. Not that she did it without a healthy dose of skepticism. "You know," she said, holding up what looked like a glowing, alien snow globe, "if these guys spent half as much time figuring out why we watch so much reality TV instead of trying to kill us, maybe they'd learn something." Her assistant, Jules, a young man who always seemed 2 steps away from a nervous breakdown, nodded vigorously. "Yeah, like how not to mess with the species that invented wrestling and karaoke." Lyra chuckled, setting the snow globe back on the table with a clink. "It's just bizarre. These hyper-advanced aliens are studying us like we're some kind of exotic zoo exhibit, and yet they still manage to botch their invasion." Jules shrugged. "Maybe they thought our stupidity was a defense mechanism. Wouldn't be the first time." Lyra turned to a console, her fingers dancing across the keys as she pulled up data on the Zorathians' latest transmissions. "Seems like they're particularly obsessed with our customs." "Customs, huh? So, what are they doing, planning to throw us a surprise welcome to the Empire Party?" Lyra snorted. "That or they're trying to figure out why we insist on celebrating birthdays every year when it's just a reminder of how close we're getting to death." Back on the bridge, Briston's mood hadn't improved. "Corbin, any word from the scouts?" he asked, trying to ignore the incessant hum of the ship's engines that sounded suspiciously like a bored bee on a sugar high. "Nothing yet, sir. They're still patrolling the outer perimeter." "Great, so we're flying blind again. Just like a bat in a sunstorm." Briston sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Remind me again why I signed up for this farce." Corbin grinned. "Because it was either this or spend the rest of your days teaching tactical theory to cadets who think strategy is a type of board game." "Ah, yes. The lesser of 2 tortures." Briston glanced at the map again. "Mark my words, Corbin. The Zorathians are up to something, and whatever it is, it's going to be stupider than their last attempt." As if on cue, the comms panel beeped to life, and a holographic image of a scout ship's captain flickered into view. "Commander Briston," the captain said, his voice laced with static, "we've picked up an unusual transmission." It's a music file, sir." "A music file from the Zorathians?" Briston raised an eyebrow. "What, are they trying to serenade us now?" "It appears so. And it's the Macarena, sir." The bridge went silent for a moment, save for the hum of the engines. Then Briston burst out laughing. "Oh, fantastic. Our esteemed alien invaders have resorted to musical diplomacy. Next, they'll be challenging us to a dance-off." Corbin shook his head, chuckling. "Well, at least they have good taste." "Good taste? Corbin, the Macarena is musical herpes. It spreads easily, and once it's in your head, there's no cure. Briston wiped a tear from his eye. All right, let's see what else they've sent us. Maybe they've included a recipe for interstellar peace along with their dance hits. Just as Briston settled himself back into his chair, the ship's alarms blared, red lights flashing ominously across the bridge. "What now?" he muttered, slamming a fist onto the armrest. Corbin checked the readings, his face pale. "Sir, we've got incoming Zorathian ships. Lots of them." "Well, there it is," Briston said with a resigned smirk. "I knew they weren't serenading us for nothing. Time to roll out the welcome mat, boys. Let's see if they've brought any new dance moves." Lyra, still tinkering with the alien artifacts, looked up sharply as the alarms echoed through the research deck. "Jules, you know what that sound means. We're about to become the galaxy's next great tragedy. Bingo. Let's get these trinkets secured. No point in letting them smash into space dust if we're about to get blown to bits ourselves." Jules scrambled to help, a flurry of arms and awkwardness. "Why do you think they're back so soon?" Lyra shrugged, her expression a mixture of grim humor and fatalism. "Maybe they're determined to become the first species to successfully invade Earth via terrible pop music." As the Zorathian ships closed in, Briston and his crew braced for the inevitable. "All right, people," Briston shouted over the chaos. "Let's show them what happens when you mess with humans. And remember, if all else fails, we can always switch to Plan B, running screaming into the void." Lyra and Jules joined the bridge crew, the air thick with tension, part anticipation, part dread. "Commander," Lyra called out, "any chance they're here to negotiate peace?" Briston snorted. "Sure, if by negotiate peace you mean shoot first, ask questions never." Lyra shook her head, grinning despite the situation. "Well, if they're going to blast us, I hope it's at least to a decent soundtrack." As the Zorathian ships came into view, their sleek forms cutting through the inky blackness of space, Briston felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. "All right, everyone," he said, his voice steady and sure. "Let's give them a show they won't forget." The battle began, a symphony of chaos, lasers slicing through the darkness with deadly precision. The Defiant weaved through the onslaught, its crew working with a unity born of desperation and stubborn human tenacity. "Commander, they are focusing fire on our engines," Corbin yelled, his voice barely audible over the din. "Of course they are. Because why not make our day just a little bit crappier?" Briston growled, adjusting their course with a deft touch. Lyra watched the unfolding battle, a mix of fear and fascination bubbling within her. "You ever wonder," she mused aloud, "why we always seem to end up in these situations?" Jules, huddled beside her, shrugged. "Maybe the universe just likes messing with the underdogs." "Or maybe," Briston interjected, a grin tugging at his lips despite the odds, "we're just too damn stubborn to die quietly." The battle raged on, each side pushing the limits of their endurance. Briston's voice rang out over the comms, each command a lifeline to his crew. "Focus fire on their lead ship. Let's see if we can give them a reason to turn tail and run." The Defiant's guns roared to life, sending a barrage of energy pulses into the void. The Zorathian flagship shuddered under the assault, sparks flying as its shields flickered and failed. "Looks like they've finally gotten the message," Corbin said, a note of triumph in his voice as the alien ships began to retreat, their formation breaking. Briston allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. "Good. Let them run home with their tails between their legs." As the last of the Zorathian ships vanished into the distance, the crew of the Defiant let out a collective breath they hadn't realized they were holding. The alarms ceased their wailing, leaving an uneasy silence in their wake. "Well, that was fun," Briston said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Let's do it again next week, eh?" Lyra laughed, a sound that was more relief than humor. "Just another day in paradise." Jules shook his head, still wide-eyed from the ordeal. "I think I'll pass on the repeat performance." Briston clapped him on the back, grinning. "Aw, come on, Jules. Where's your sense of adventure?" As the crew began the laborious task of assessing the damage and piecing their ship back together, Briston allowed himself a moment to reflect. The Zorathians would be back, of that he had no doubt, but for now they had survived, and in the grand scheme of things that was all that mattered. "Here's to surviving another day," Lyra said, raising an imaginary glass. "And to hoping the Zorathians learn to appreciate Earth's finer cultural exports before they try this again." Briston chuckled, joining her in the toast. "Like terrible pop music and our stubborn refusal to die." "Exactly. Here's to humanity's greatest hits." And as the Defiant sailed through the darkness, battered but unbroken, the crew knew one thing for sure. The universe was a tough place, but humans were tougher. And if the Zorathians wanted a fight, they'd get one hell of a show. Commander Briston stared at the holographic map, contemplating the smattering of alien ships retreating like a school of fish that had just realized the water was on fire. He leaned back in his chair, the worn leather creaking like an old man's knees. "Well, that was something," he said, half to himself. Corbin adjusted his headset, a permanent fixture glued to his skull by years of habit. "You think they'll come back with disco next time?" "Probably," Briston replied, a smile twitching at the corner of his mouth. "Zorathians seem to have a knack for turning up like bad exes. You know, the kind that can't take a hint and think no just means try harder." Lyra joined them on the bridge, a smirk playing across her lips. "I bet they'll be back with a new obsession soon. Maybe they'll try to conquer us with interpretative dance, or karaoke," Corbin suggested, grinning. "Either way," Briston said, settling his gaze on the fading blips of the retreating fleet, "they're not done with us yet. I bet they're just regrouping, trying to figure out what earthly nonsense to throw at us next." His prediction wasn't far off. Hours later, as the crew limped through the aftermath of battle, Corbin's console beeped with an incoming transmission. "Sir, we've got something from the Zorathians," he announced, eyebrow raised in mock surprise. "I'd say it's a love letter, but then I'd be lying." "Put it through," Briston ordered, bracing himself for the latest round of interstellar stupidity. The message projected into the middle of the bridge, a bewildering series of images depicting various human holidays. Christmas trees, Thanksgiving turkeys, and what suspiciously looked like a Halloween jack-o'-lantern flickered in a loop, a bizarre slideshow of holiday cheer. "Well, that's festive," Lyra ventured, tilting her head as if a different angle might make it all make sense. Briston rubbed his temples. "Let me get this straight. They've gone from let's blow them up to let's invite them to a costume party." Corbin scratched his head, staring at the images. "Seems like it. Maybe General Xylox thinks confetti is deadlier than plasma cannons, or they're planning to kill us with kindness," Lyra added. "Death by holiday spirit." Briston chuckled darkly. "Ever been trampled during a Black Friday sale?" "They might be onto something." With a shrug, he turned away from the looping holiday montage. "All right, people, since our friends are suddenly holiday enthusiasts, I say we play along. Let's see what kind of chaos we can stir up by indulging their new obsession." Lyra clasped her hands together, eyes gleaming with mischief. "I've got a few ideas on how to exploit their sudden fascination. Maybe we can convince them that New Year's is a time for planetary fireworks. You know, really go out with a bang." "Genius," Briston said, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "If they want holidays, we'll give them holidays. I want our best brains on this. Dig into every ridiculous human custom and see what we can turn into a tactical advantage." Corbin nodded, already pulling up a list of Earth's most inane traditions. "All right, crew, let's get to it. I want to know everything there is about Earth holidays. If these aliens want to go full Hallmark, we'll make sure they regret it." As the crew delved into the quirky depths of human culture, Briston felt a strange sense of anticipation. It was a gamble, sure, but if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was turning chaos into opportunity. The Zorathians might have lasers and starships, but they were about to learn that nothing was as dangerous as a species that celebrated the absurdity of its own existence. Days passed with the crew of the UHS Defiant brainstorming ways to weaponize merriment. The ship's corridors echoed with snippets of conversation that sounded like a deranged party planner's fever dream. Maybe we can convince them to light up fireworks during their approach, Jules suggested. It'll be like a signal to our defenses. Can we trick them into thinking Easter involves hiding their weapons instead of eggs? Another crew member offered. Lyra, seated cross-legged on the floor amidst a pile of holiday paraphernalia, waved a plastic skeleton arm in the air. How about turning Halloween into a military parade? Imagine their faces when they show up in ghost costumes and we roll out tanks. Corbin, arms folded, leaned against the bulkhead, watching the madness unfold with a hint of pride. You know, this might just be crazy enough to work. Briston strode into the room, nodding at the hive of activity. All right, everyone, bring me your best holiday-themed battle plans by tomorrow. If we're going to sell this madness, it better be credible. The ship buzzed with energy, a strange mix of levity and urgency. The Zorathians, in their bizarre pursuit to understand the latest human oddity, had inadvertently handed the crew the perfect distraction. Briston knew they wouldn't have long before the aliens realized they'd been duped, but for now, it was enough. Back on the bridge, Corbin side-eyed the holographic calendar ticking down to the next expected Zorathian appearance. You think this will actually work? Briston shrugged, a glint of devilry in his eyes. If it doesn't, at least we'll go down in history as the first crew to try and win a war with seasonal Dacre. Here's hoping they don't see through it, Corbin said. Otherwise, we'll look like the galaxy's biggest fools, true enough. But at least we'll be memorable fools, Briston replied, taking a long sip from his coffee mug. He contemplated the absurdity of their situation. Aliens who wanted to conquer Earth had decided to study the very cultural noise that drove humans mad with both glee and ire. If the universe had a sense of humor, it was a dark one indeed. When the expected day came and the Zorathians returned, their ships holding formation just beyond the pull of Earth's gravity, the Defiant was ready. Briston stood on the bridge, his eyes locked on the looming threat, their numbers a stark reminder of the razor's edge they were dancing on. All right, people, he said, voice steady. Let's roll out the welcome mat and see if we can convince them they've got the wrong planet. The transmission from the Zorathian flagship flickered into life, showing General Xylox, a creature that looked like it had been designed by a committee of nightmare-inducing toddlers. Its voice, a grating rasp, echoed in the bridge. Humans, Xylox greeted. The word spat like it was an unpleasant aftertaste. We wish to understand your rituals. Briston gave a nonchalant salute. Well, General, you've picked the right time. We're just gearing up for our annual Earthlings Love Aliens celebration. Xylox's expression was unreadable, though he seemed to be squinting suspiciously. Explain. Corbin, suppressing a laugh, gestured to the various screens around the bridge that displayed a confusing array of holiday imagery. You see, every year we celebrate and honor those who've shown an interest in our planet. Briston nodded, his face a mask of sincerity. It's a big deal. Parades, food, rituals. You'd be amazed at the sheer number of ways we've developed to celebrate. Xylox's eyes narrowed further, but there was a hint of curiosity, like a cat watching a particularly stupid mouse. And these rituals. They are meant to honor those who visit, absolutely, Briston replied smoothly. In fact, we have this one tradition where we set off fireworks to ward off evil spirits. It's quite the spectacle. The generals seem to consider this, the wheels of thought turning behind those alien eyes. Very well. We will observe your customs. Proceed with your ritual. Briston nodded. Perfect. Just make sure your ships stay within viewing range. It's traditional to observe from a distance. Wouldn't want you to miss the show. As the transmission cut out, Briston turned to his crew, a grin spreading across his face. All right, people, let's give them the show of a lifetime. Light up those fireworks and get ready to broadcast every second of it. The crew moved with purpose, each step a calculated move in their grand deception. They flooded the airwaves with images and sounds of celebration, the illusion so convincing that even Briston found himself half expecting a celebration to spontaneously erupt. "Think they're buying it?" Lyra asked, glancing up from her station. Corbin chuckled, shaking his head. "If they're not, they're sure doing a good job of pretending they are. The Zorathian ships maintain their position, a silent audience to Earth's unexpected festival of nonsense." Briston knew they were playing with fire, but there was a certain thrill in the risk. It was a dance of bluff and bravado, a human specialty. "All right, folks," Briston said, leaning back with a satisfied sigh. "Now we sit back and see how long it takes them to realize they've been duped." The crew settled into a comfortable rhythm, the air buzzing with the triumph of the moment. For now, they had bought themselves time. Time to prepare, time to plan, and maybe, just maybe, time to turn their desperate gamble into a lasting victory. As the Defiant sailed on, buoyed by their audacious success, Briston couldn't help but marvel at the absurdity of it all. Here they were, humanity's last hope, dangling victory by a thread spun from the very chaos that defined them. "Here's to surviving another day," he murmured, raising an imaginary glass, knowing full well that tomorrow could bring a very different kind of challenge. And as the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to the struggles of a tiny ship and its defiant crew, Briston knew that whatever came next, they'd face it with the same irreverent spirit. Because in a universe full of the unexpected, humans excelled at the one thing no one else could quite master: laughing in the face of the inevitable. Briston lounged in his captain's chair on the UHS Defiant, the holographic map of Zorathian territory glowing before him like a particularly unflattering nightlight. The Zorathians were still hanging around Earth's orbit, seemingly trying to make sense of the human cultural smorgasbord they'd been served. Briston couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. Aliens trying to decipher Earth's holidays was like watching a cat try to use a toaster. "Looks like our little charade is causing some confusion," Corbin said, leaning casually against his console, headset perched at a rakish angle. "Reports from intercepted comms suggest they've got no idea what to make of New Year's." Lyra sidled up, a smirk playing on her lips. "Imagine that. A species that can conquer planets brought to its knees by a calendar and some fireworks. What do they think is going to happen when they hit Valentine's Day? Spontaneous combustion from tacky heart decorations." Briston snorted. "If they think New Year's is bad, just wait till someone explains Valentine's Day to them." "Nothing says intimidation like overpriced roses and an existential crisis about love." "True," Corbin said, nodding as he flipped through a list of holidays. "But it's Easter that's got me worried. The moment they try to figure out why we hide eggs." "Let them try and make sense of it," Briston shrugged. "Maybe they'll spend so much time chasing bunnies around their ships they'll forget to fire their damned weapons." Lyra tilted her head, eyes gleaming with mischief. "You know, I've been thinking. If we can keep them off balance with the holidays, why don't we steer them toward the ones that'll really grind their gears?" "Like what?" Corbin asked, his eyebrows raised in curiosity. "April Fools," she replied with a grin sharp enough to cut steel. What better way to destabilize a meticulous military force than an entire day dedicated to elaborate pranking? Briston tapped his chin thoughtfully. "Not bad, Lyra. If we can convince them it's a serious affair, they'll be so paranoid they won't know what's real and what's not." "Exactly. Plus, it's an opportunity to slip a few fake military plans their way, wrapped up as a joke," Lyra added. "They'll be too busy trying to figure out if it's a prank to counter it properly." Corbin chuckled, imagining the Zorathian command scrambling to decode human humor. "I'd pay to see the look on General Xylox's face when his troops start setting up booby traps that end with confetti showers instead of explosions." "All right, I like it," Briston said, nodding. "Let's start planting the seeds. Lyra, you're in charge of making April Fools look like the most revered day of the year. Make it sound like anyone who misses it is a fool." "Leave it to me, Commander," she said, already plotting her strategy. I'll have them tying their shoelaces together in no time." As the crew plotted their next move, Briston turned his attention back to the holographic map, a faint frown creasing his brow. The Zorathians might be occupied for now, but he knew better than to get too comfortable. They had a knack for bouncing back, and when they did, it wouldn't be with party hats and noisemakers. "Corbin," Briston said, his tone shifting to one of quiet efficiency, "what's our status on defense preparations? Just in case this whole holiday gambit doesn't hold them indefinitely." Corbin straightened, flipping through screens with practiced ease. "Shields are at full capacity. Weapons systems are ready, though we might want to run some drills. Last thing we need is a malfunction because someone forgot which button to press. Good. Let's keep our people sharp. The last thing we need is to get cocky and wind up as space debris," Briston said. As if on cue, an alert flashed across Corbin's console. "Looks like we've got some movement in their ranks. Seems like they're rearranging their ships into a formation that looks suspiciously like a heart." Briston blinked, momentarily caught off guard. Are they trying to send us a Valentine? Beats me," Corbin replied with a bemused shake of his head. "Maybe they think it's a peace offering." Lyra laughed, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "More like a please explain why you humans do this. Whatever their reason, we can't let our guard down," Briston said, his tone firm. "Keep monitoring them closely. If they so much as twitch in the wrong direction, I want to know about it." "Understood, Commander," Corbin said, his fingers dancing across the console. Briston watched the holographic map, a grim determination settling over him. They were treading a thin line between brilliant strategy and sheer lunacy. But if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was navigating chaos with a grin and a middle finger to the stars. As the Zorathians continued their misguided cultural experiment, Briston couldn't help but feel a twisted sort of pride. They'd managed to turn an impending invasion into a cosmic sitcom, complete with alien spectators trying to decipher the plot. But he knew, deep down, that the curtain could drop at any moment, and when it did, they'd have to be ready. "Here's to madness," Briston murmured to himself, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "It's the only thing keeping us alive." With each passing hour, reports trickled in from their network of informants, detailing the unfolding chaos within the Zorathian ranks. Ships were reportedly running low on supplies as they diverted resources to construct replicas of Easter bunnies. Some units were allegedly using valuable engine fuel to roast marshmallows over makeshift campfires, convinced that human Esmores held some significant tactical advantage. "Looks like they're really diving deep into this," Corbin said, shaking his head in disbelief. "I half expect them to start sending us their own holiday ideas next. Maybe Zorathian Conquest Day." Lyra snickered. "Let's hope they don't make it a tradition. We've got enough on our plates without adding alien holidays to the mix." Briston leaned back in his chair, a sense of cautious optimism settling over him. They'd managed to buy themselves some time, and with any luck, they could use the Zorathians' newfound fascination to their advantage. "Corbin, keep an eye on their communications. Lyra, continue feeding them our holiday nonsense. And everyone stay sharp. Just because they're distracted doesn't mean they're harmless." "Got it, Commander," Corbin replied, tapping away at his console. Lyra nodded, a determined glint in her eye. "If they want culture, we'll give them culture. Let's see how they handle a bit of human absurdity." As the Defiant continued its vigil, Briston allowed himself a moment to appreciate the sheer insanity of their situation. They were balancing on a knife's edge, caught between a potential victory and an all-out war with a species that could easily obliterate them if it ever sobered up from its holiday-induced stupor. But if humanity had one enduring trait, it was resilience, an ability to see humor in the face of oblivion, to laugh when the universe seemed intent on tearing them apart. And in that moment, surrounded by laughter and chaos, Briston felt a surge of pride for his ragtag crew, for their unwavering spirit in the face of insurmountable odds. "Keep your wits about you," Briston advised, his voice steady and sure. If the universe wants to take us, it'll have to pry us from our own two-finger salute. Corbin nodded, a grin spreading across his face. Damn right, Commander. Here's to hoping the Zorathians enjoy their crash course in human lunacy. As the Defiant sailed through the cosmos, Briston knew the battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, they'd managed to turn the tide, to push back against the inevitable with nothing more than laughter and a healthy dose of madness. And in the grand scheme of things, that was something worth celebrating. The UHS Defiant hovered in the shadowed expanse of space, its crew immersed in an ongoing symphony of chaos and cosmic comedy. The Zorathians, mighty conquerors of the galaxy, had unwittingly become the punchline of a galactic joke. Their empire teetered on the brink, their resources misallocated to the elaborate human holidays that, misinterpreted, seemed to them like strategic maneuvers worthy of intense scrutiny. Briston lounged in his seat, the bridge around him buzzing with an energy that was both focused and irreverent. "Look at them," he muttered, eyes fixed on the holographic map. "They're like a bunch of cats chasing laser pointers. All distraction, no direction." Corbin, ever the optimist, flicked through a series of intercepted Zorathian communications. Their latest move has them gearing up for what they think is a human invasion. Apparently, Thanksgiving translates to something akin to prepare for war in Zorathian. Thanksgiving. Lyra snorted from her console, where she was busy crafting the next batch of cultural confusion. What are they gonna do? Attack us with pumpkin pies and turkey stuffing? Briston chuckled, the sound a low rumble barely audible over the chatter of the bridge. If they think Thanksgiving is a war cry, wait till they figure out Black Friday. They'll be deploying discount drones and markdown missiles. Lyra leaned back, arms crossed, a smirk playing on her lips. We could turn that to our advantage, you know. Feed them a steady stream of nonsense about how Thanksgiving is when we give thanks by annihilating our enemies. Right, Corbin said, an eyebrow raised. And make it sound like Black Friday is our version of a planetary purge, a chance to clear out the old to make way for the new. They'll be too busy trying to understand the sales frenzy to notice anything else. Perfect, Briston agreed, tapping a finger against the armrest of his chair. Let's keep them on this wild goose chase. It'll give us the time we need to prepare for a real strike. As the crew nodded in agreement, Briston's mind flicked through potential strategies. He knew they had a narrow window to act while the Zorathian leadership was distracted. The challenge lay in hitting hard and fast before the aliens pieced together the truth behind their farcical cultural subterfuge. "Corbin, what's the status of our tactical units?" Briston asked, his voice carrying the weight of impending action. Corbin, ever efficient, spun his chair towards the console, fingers flying over keys. "Tactical units are prepped and ready. We've got a fleet of drones armed with the latest in human ingenuity. If you can call duct tape and explosive surprises ingenuity." Briston grinned. "Duct tape and explosives. Our ancestors would be proud. Lyra, keep up the holiday charade. I want the Zorathians so tangled in cultural confusion they couldn't find their own asses if we handed them a map." "Got it, Commander," Lyra replied, already crafting another communique filled with misleading traditions and bizarre rituals. "I'll have them believing that our annual turkey dance is a strategic maneuver." The bridge hummed with a sense of purpose, each crew member focused on their task. They were setting the stage for a tactical advantage, leveraging Earth's most absurd traditions to keep one of the galaxy's most formidable foes at bay. Briston watched the holographic map, the Zorathian fleet shifting in patterns that bordered on nonsensical. A formation resembling a cornucopia took shape, as if the alien ships had decided to embody the very spirit of Thanksgiving. He shook his head, bemused at the sight. If they keep this up, they'll end up celebrating St. Patrick's Day and dye their ships green, Briston muttered, more to himself than anyone else. They might even throw a parade, Corbin added with a chuckle. Green ships marching in space, confused as hell about why they're doing it. "Let's hope they don't figure it out anytime soon," Briston replied. "The longer they are distracted, the more time we have to strike without them seeing it coming." Outside the transparent viewport, the stars stretched into infinity, a reminder of the vastness and uncertainty of their situation. The Defiant was just one ship, but under Briston's command, it carried the weight of humanity's hopes and humor. "Prepare for war," Briston murmured, the words laced with irony, or a really bizarre holiday celebration. Either way, we're in it for the long haul. As the hours ticked by, reports continued to filter in from their network of informants scattered across the galaxy. Zorathian units were reportedly holding elaborate feasts, convinced they were pre-battle rituals. Others were decorating their ships with makeshift garlands, entirely misunderstanding the concept of festive decoration. "Looks like they're really going all out on this," Corbin remarked, shaking his head in disbelief. "I mean, who knew conquerors could be so gullible and festive?" Lyra countered, not bothering to hide her amusement. "They're over there playing dress-up while we're ready to kick them in the teeth." Briston nodded, satisfied with the way things were unfolding. Their strategy was working. The Zorathians were so tangled in the web of cultural confusion that they were effectively out of commission. "Corbin, keep monitoring their comms. Lyra, keep them on their toes. And everyone stay sharp. We're flying through a minefield of madness, and the last thing we need is to trip up." "Roger that, Commander," Corbin replied, his eyes glued to the constant stream of Zorathian transmissions. Lyra grinned, already plotting the next cultural curveball. "I've got a few ideas that'll have them tying themselves in knots." Briston leaned back, a sense of cautious optimism settling over him. They were on the brink of something big, teetering on the edge of victory or disaster. But for now, they had the upper hand, and that was all that mattered. As the Defiant continued its vigil, Briston felt a surge of pride for his crew, their irreverence and their resilience. They were the embodiment of humanity's stubborn spirit, refusing to back down in the face of overwhelming odds, choosing instead to laugh and fight another day. In the vast expanse of space, amidst the chaos of cultural misinterpretation, the UHS Defiant stood as a beacon of human defiance, a reminder that sometimes the best weapon was not brute strength, but a good old-fashioned joke and a bit of madcap ingenuity. "Here's to holiday cheer," Briston murmured, a wry smile on his lips. "And to the madness that keeps us alive." Meanwhile, aboard the Zorathian flagship, the alien commanders were embroiled in a heated debate. General Xylox, a towering figure draped in ceremonial armor that looked suspiciously like tinsel, paced the bridge with mounting frustration. "What is the meaning of this Thanksgiving?" Xylox demanded, his voice echoing off the ship's metallic walls. "Our analysts believe it is a prelude to an invasion. Yet, all I see are tales of feasting and gratitude." His second-in-command, a frazzled-looking officer named Arvok, shuffled through a stack of reports. "It appears to be a ritual involving the consumption of large amounts of food, General. There's mention of something called gravy that seems crucial to the proceedings." "Gravy?" Xylox barked, incredulity etched across his alien features. "Are they planning to drown us in this gravy? Is it a weapon?" Arvok hesitated, glancing nervously around the bridge. "We do not believe it to be a weapon, sir. More a sauce." Xylox threw up his hands in exasperation. "A sauce? By the moons of Zeroth, these humans test our patience with their absurdities. Prepare our forces, Arvok. If they wish to attack us with gravy, we shall be ready." Back on the Defiant, Briston watched the Zorathian ships maneuver into what could only be described as an awkward battle stance. He shook his head, bemused by their continued confusion. "They're gearing up for war over sauce?" Corbin asked, barely containing his laughter. "Looks like it," Briston replied, a grin tugging at his lips. "They must think we're planning to douse them in culinary chaos." Lyra cackled, shaking her head. "Imagine the look on their faces when they realize we celebrate by stuffing ourselves stupid and passing out on the couch." Briston nodded, his expression turning serious. "Let's not get complacent. Keep the pressure on them, but remember, we're only a misstep away from a real fight." The crew understood the gravity of their situation, even as they reveled in the ridiculousness of the Zorathian misinterpretations. They were playing a dangerous game, teetering on the brink of disaster with nothing but their wits and humor to guide them. As the Defiant continued its vigil, Briston felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders. They were on the edge of something monumental, where one wrong move could lead to catastrophe. "Keep your eyes on the prize," he reminded his crew, his voice steady and sure. "And remember, if the universe wants to take us, it'll have to pry us from our cold, snarky hands." With that, the Defiant pressed on through the cosmos, ready to face whatever absurd challenge awaited them next. For in the vastness of space, where insanity reigned supreme, they had one thing the Zorathians lacked: a sense of humor sharp enough to cut through the chaos and turn the tide in their favor. General Xylox peered out from the bridge of the Zorathian flagship, his ceremonial armor still clinging on like a desperate holiday ornament. The metaphorical tinsel itched, but he wore it as a reminder of the recent fiascos. If only his empire's stability was as resilient as the adhesive keeping this ridiculous garb in place. "They're laughing at us," Xylox muttered to himself. His jaw clenched with the kind of resolve only found in those who are equal parts determined and delusional. But the joke will be on them soon enough. Arvok, his second-in-command, shuffled up, looking like he'd just seen the universe's worst open-mic comedy. "General, there's chaos in our ranks. We've detected sporadic human advances and our troops are still entangled in these cultural constructs." Xylox rubbed his temples, feeling a headache of cosmic proportions blooming. "The Empire is crumbling around us, Arvok, and all because we can't decode human insanity. But we won't abandon this holiday experiment. It's our best shot at understanding these creatures, and eventually subjugating them." Arvok nodded, though his expression screamed skepticism. "Yes, General, but might I suggest refocusing on a more traditional warfare approach?" Xylox waved him off, his eyes fixed on the interplanetary highway that was becoming more of a cosmic slip and slide. "No, Arvok, we will persist. If humans can weaponize gravy, we can weaponize their holidays." Meanwhile, aboard the UHS Defiant, the atmosphere was anything but festive. Briston stood in the command center, not for the first time wondering if they hadn't bitten off more than they could chew. The Zorathians, confused and desperate, were lashing out, their ships darting and firing with the precision of a blindfolded drunk trying to hit a piñata. "Briston, we're taking on some serious heat," Corbin called from his console, his usual optimism wearing thinner than a politician's promise. "Their attacks are all over the place, but there are a lot of them." Briston grunted in response, eyes glued to the holographic map where the Zorathian fleet seemed to be having some kind of interstellar seizure. "Well, they're certainly not lacking enthusiasm. I'll give them that. How are our drones holding up?" "Like a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest," Lyra interjected, her tone edged with frustration. "We're losing units faster than we can deploy them." Briston let out a long breath, the grim reality sinking in. "All right, folks, listen up. We're in for a rough ride. But we've got one thing those Zorathian bastards don't: an actual plan." "Let me guess," Corbin chimed in. "You're thinking we just need to outlast their chaos. Wait them out until they trip over their own confusion." Briston nodded, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Exactly. We're going to ride this madness out. It's not pretty, but when has it ever been?" The crew exchanged glances, the weight of the situation pressing down like a particularly heavy planetary body. But they'd been here before, trapped between a rock and a ridiculous place, and somehow, someway, they'd always managed to come out the other side. "All right, Lyra," Briston continued, snapping back to business. "Keep feeding them those holiday lines. We're going to confuse them right back into their home planet if we have to." "You got it, Commander," she replied, smirk firmly back in place. "Let's see how they like our Easter Bunny offensive." If they thought Thanksgiving was bad, wait until they get a load of chocolate eggs as strategic munitions. The crew resumed their duties, each member of the Defiant working tirelessly to maintain their precarious advantage. Briston knew it was only a matter of time before the Zorathians' chaotic tactics either imploded or found a way to breach their defenses. "Keep those shields tight, Corbin," Briston commanded, gripping the armrest of his chair with white-knuckled determination. "Let's make sure our gift baskets arrive intact." On board the Zorathian flagship, Xylox was tirelessly attempting to restore order amidst the escalating pandemonium. Each new report was another nail in the coffin of his already shaky sanity. "General, another human transmission," Arvok announced, the excitement in his voice at odds with the dire circumstances. "This one mentioned something about a nursery rhyme strategy. Apparently, it's part of their Easter Bunny offensive." Xylox paused, confusion and annoyance battling for dominance. Nursery rhymes, Easter bunnies. "What in the name of the void does any of this mean?" "We're still decoding, sir," Arvok replied, desperately trying to keep his composure. "It seems to involve small, colorful confections, possibly some kind of psychological warfare." Xylox sighed, leaning heavily on the railing that encircled the bridge like a protective barrier against the insanity threatening to overwhelm him. "These humans are more twisted than we ever imagined. Prepare our forces. If they wish to drown us in confectionery chaos, then we shall." "Eat it," Arvok offered, unable to suppress a grin. Xylox shot him a withering glare. "No, we will counter with every bit of ingenuity we possess." "They think they can out-crazy us, but they haven't seen what a Zorathian on a mission can do." Back on the Defiant, Briston and his crew were in the fight of their lives. The Zorathians' erratic assaults were relentless, each wave more chaotic and unpredictable than the last. "Commander, it's getting dicey out here," Lyra reported, her fingers a blur over the console as she juggled their defenses and the next wave of cultural nonsense. "They've started deploying something that looks like, well, like confetti." Briston rolled his eyes, the absurdity of their predicament not lost on him. "Of course they have. What's next? Balloons filled with some kind of alien gas?" Corbin snorted. "With our luck. Probably. I'd say we're about 2 steps away from a cosmic birthday party." "All right, enough chatter," Briston interrupted, his voice losing none of its edge. "We need to keep our heads in the game. They're throwing everything they've got at us, and we need to stay focused." The crew of the Defiant knew the odds were against them, but they also knew they had something the Zorathians didn't: the ability to adapt, to roll with the punches, and most importantly, to laugh in the face of overwhelming adversity. "Lyra, keep up the charade. Corbin, give me a status update on our drone fleet. I want to know what we've got left to throw into this mess." Corbin quickly scanned the readouts, his expression grim. "It's not looking good, Commander. We're down to the last of our reserves. If we don't turn the tide soon, we're going to be in a world of hurt." A heavy silence settled over the bridge as Briston digested the news. It was their darkest hour, where the scales tipped precariously between victory and annihilation. But if there was one thing Briston and his crew had learned, it was that darkness was simply an opportunity for light to shine through. "Then we'll just have to hold out a little longer," Briston declared, his voice steely with resolve. "We've been through worse. We can do this." The Defiant shuddered under the impact of another Zorathian salvo, the lights flickering momentarily before stabilizing. It was a testament to the ship's resilience and to the crew's ability to keep going, no matter what the universe threw at them. "Keep your eyes on the prize, people," Briston reminded them, echoing his earlier words. "We're not out of this yet." As the Defiant continued to weather the Zorathian storm, Briston felt the weight of his decisions pressing down on him. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and on the brink of collapse, but they were also united by a shared determination to see this through to the bitter end. "Here's to surviving another day," Briston murmured to himself, a wry smile ghosting across his lips. "And to the madness that keeps us alive." In the vast emptiness of space, where humor and chaos danced on the edge of oblivion, the UHS Defiant held firm, a testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity, a reminder that even in the darkest hour, they were never truly alone. And somewhere out there, amidst the chaos and confusion, General Xylox prepared for one final push, determined to prove that even the most absurd of experiments could yield results. For in the grand scheme of the cosmos, where nothing was ever as it seemed, there was always a chance for redemption, even for the most misguided of us all. Whether it would be enough to turn the tide remained to be seen. But for now, the battle raged on, and the outcome was anyone's guess. The bridge of the UHS Defiant was a mess of screens flickering with static, alarms bleating like a herd of frantic goats, and crew members scrambling like contestants on a cosmic game show where the prize was just not dying. Commander Briston leaned back in his chair, wondering if they'd ever catch a break or if they'd just end up as space debris, adding to the already cluttered interplanetary highway. "Status, Corbin," Briston barked, more out of habit than expectation. By now, the news was usually the same, bad and getting worse. Corbin, the ever-optimistic lieutenant, glanced up from his console, his glasses slightly askew. "Well, sir, if they keep hitting us with confetti, we might just die of embarrassment." Briston grunted, a sound that could have meant anything from agreement to indigestion. "Lyra, any progress on confusing these alien bastards with our quirky human traditions?" Lyra, the Defiant's cultural strategist, though she preferred the term professional confuser, was deep in thought, tapping away at her console. "Actually, Commander, I think I've found something. It's called Gift Day. From what we've intercepted, the Zorathians are absolutely obsessed." Briston raised an eyebrow. "Gift Day sounds like a capitalist fever dream." "Exactly," Lyra replied with a grin. "Apparently, it's this idea of giving wildly expensive gifts to signify alliances and then stabbing each other in the back with courteous thank-you notes." Corbin snorted, like office politics but with more glitter. Briston leaned forward, interest piqued. "And how do we use this to our advantage?" Lyra's grin widened, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "We feed them misinformation. Make them think that if they don't give the right gift, it's an act of war. So, we're weaponizing passive-aggressive gift-giving." "I like it," Briston said. "What's the plan?" "We start broadcasting fake signals. We'll tell them our ultimate weapon is a peace box filled with goodwill and glittery destruction. If they want to keep us happy, they need to match it." On the Zorathian flagship, General Xylox was going through reports with the enthusiasm of a man sorting his own tax returns. The usual chaos was punctuated by the latest human transmission blaring through their comms. "Arvok, what the hell is a peace box?" Xylox asked, his voice weary but tinged with curiosity. Arvok, standing next to him looking like he'd just seen a ghost in a clown suit, was equally baffled. "According to the humans, it's some kind of sacred container that holds universal harmony." Xylox rubbed his temples, the headache from earlier morphing into a full-blown migraine. "And what happens if we don't reciprocate?" They alluded to it being an insult beyond reconciliation. "There was something about an interstellar insult that goes beyond just flipping the bird," Arvok replied, trying to keep a straight face. Xylox's frown deepened. Human culture seemed more like a labyrinth designed by a lunatic with a penchant for irony. "Fine, let's play along. Prepare an emissary with gifts of equal or greater." Absurdity. Back on the Defiant, Briston and Lyra observed the Zorathians' response with a peculiar mix of amusement and disbelief. The aliens were actually falling for it, hook, line, and sinker. "They've taken the bait," Lyra reported, her tone victorious. "They want to send us gifts in return." Corbin couldn't help but chuckle. "Great. Maybe they'll send us a fruit basket." "Always wanted to try Zorathian bananas." Briston nodded, though his expression remained cautiously optimistic. "Let's not get too excited just yet. This could all blow up in our faces." The crew continued their work, the tension on the bridge easing ever so slightly at the prospect of a plan actually working for once. But Briston knew better than to count his chickens before they hatched, or in their case, before the aliens stopped trying to kill them. "Commander," Corbin said, his voice cutting through the temporary lull, "we've got incoming signals from the Zorathians. They want to open a channel." Briston sighed, straightening in his chair. "Patch them through. Let's see what kind of intergalactic crap they've concocted." The screen flickered before displaying General Xylox, looking as dignified as one could in ceremonial armor that resembled a Christmas tree on steroids. "Commander Briston," Xylox began, his voice like gravel in a blender, "in acknowledgement of Gift Day, we wish to extend our own peace box." Briston fought to keep a straight face. "We appreciate your gesture, General. We, look forward to it." Behind him, Lyra was practically vibrating with suppressed laughter, and Corbin was biting down hard on his lip, trying desperately not to lose it entirely. "May this exchange of goodwill bring us closer to understanding," Xylox continued, sounding like he was reciting from a poorly translated greeting card. "Absolutely," Briston replied, maintaining his diplomatic veneer. "Exchange of ideas and all that." The channel closed, leaving the crew of the Defiant to digest what had just happened. "Did we just con an alien empire into thinking gift-giving is a strategic move?" Lyra asked, disbelief coloring her words. "Looks like it," Briston said, unable to keep the pride out of his voice. "Let's hope they don't realize it's all smoke and mirrors." As the Defiant continued its precarious journey through chaos, the humans watched with a mix of anxiety and hilarity as the Zorathians scrambled to understand the nuances of Gift Day. The alien fleet was distracted, leadership in turmoil, exactly what the humans needed to regroup and plan their next move. "Corbin, what's the status of our defenses?" Briston asked, knowing full well the answer would likely dampen his recently improved mood. "We're holding barely," Corbin replied, scanning through the readouts. "Our drones are hanging on by a thread and the shields are, well, let's just say they're more of a concept at this point." Briston nodded. It wasn't great, but it was better than a Zorathian missile enema. "All right, team," he said, rallying the crew with the kind of determination that comes from knowing you're this close to not dying. "Let's keep the pressure on. Lyra, keep feeding them those holiday illusions. We need to keep them distracted as long as possible." "You got it, Commander," Lyra responded, fingers already flying over the console as she crafted a new wave of cultural misinformation. "How do you feel about the July 4th firework frenzy?" Briston chuckled, a dark humor in his eyes. "Sounds perfect. Let's light up the sky." Back on the Zorathian flagship, Xylox was trying to keep his composure as his aides buzzed around him like bees on a sugar rush. "General, the humans have initiated something called the July 4th firework frenzy," Arvok reported, his voice tinged with a mix of awe and confusion. Xylox nodded, his expression resolute despite the absurdity of the situation. "Then we must prepare our own display. If it's a show of force they want, it's a show they'll get." Arvok couldn't help but chuckle at the irony. Fireworks. Who would have thought the universe could be so colorful? As the Zorathians scrambled to respond to yet another bizarrely creative human tradition, Briston allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They were still in the fight, still standing, and if manipulating the enemy through cultural chaos was the ticket, then so be it. But even as the Defiant skirted the edge of disaster, Briston knew they couldn't rely on confusion tactics forever. They needed a long-term solution, something more than just out-crazying an already insane situation. "Corbin," Briston called, his tone suddenly serious. "Start thinking about our long-term strategy. We need to end this before they wise up." Corbin nodded, his optimism tempered with a grim determination. "Understood, Commander. I'll get on it right away." And with that, the crew of the Defiant continued their fight, navigating the treacherous waters of interstellar warfare with little more than wit, grit, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, they could laugh their way to victory. As the Defiant drifted through the void, its crew clinging to the fragile thread of hope, Briston couldn't help but smile. They might be outnumbered, outgunned, and on the brink of collapse, but they were also something else entirely human. And if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was turning the tables, even when all seemed lost. "Here's to us," Briston murmured, raising an imaginary glass to the universe. "And to the madness that may just save our skins." In the cacophony of space, where chaos reigned supreme and nothing was as it seemed, the UHS Defiant held its course, a beacon of humor and resilience in a cosmos gone mad. And as long as there was a shred of hope, they'd keep going, fighting not just for survival, but for the sheer joy of making it to see another day. The UHS Defiant lurked on the outskirts of the interplanetary highway, which at this point resembled more of a cosmic scrapyard than a bustling thoroughfare. Commander Briston sat in his command chair, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, sipping on the last of his caffeine ration. The bridge hummed with the usual low-level chaos that was part and parcel of their daily existence. "All right, people," Briston announced, his voice cutting through the din like a laser scalpel. "Time to put our money where our mouths are. Corbin, status update." Lieutenant Corbin, perpetually optimistic and annoyingly, still wearing that boyish grin that suggested he knew a joke no one else did, flicked through his console readouts. "Shields are patched up with duct tape and a prayer, Commander. Drones are prepped, though they're about as reliable as a Zorathian love letter, which is to say, completely open to interpretation." Briston snorted. "Good enough for government work. Lyra, how's our cultural assault coming along?" Lyra, their resident professional confuser, shrugged nonchalantly. "The July 4th firework frenzy seems to have them chasing their tails. General Xylox is probably throwing more resources at setting off fireworks than at his own defenses." "Perfect," Briston said, allowing himself a small, satisfied smile. "Let's go give them a light show of our own. Corbin, initiate the assault. I want drones in their faces before they can figure out which way is up." "Roger that," Corbin said, his fingers dancing over the console. Drones deployed and heading straight into the lion's den. Outside the ship, the void came alive with the whir and hum of their mechanical cavalry, charging into the chaos with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer to an antique vase. The Zorathian flagship loomed ahead, decked out like some bizarre carnival construct that would have been right at home in an intergalactic parade. On the Zorathian flagship, General Xylox was juggling a pile of reports and the newest batch of human psychological warfare. The July 4th firework frenzy had been interpreted by his tacticians as a potential signal for an impending assault. Little did they know they were already knee-deep in it. "Arvok, get those fireworks ready," Xylox barked, his patience thinner than rice paper. "I want the humans to see our might before they even think about turning tail." Arvok, always the skeptical second in command, raised an eyebrow. "Are we hoping to dazzle them into submission or just blind them with our enthusiasm?" "Whichever works first," Xylox replied, his frustration mounting like a tidal wave. "They want a show. We'll give them a goddamn spectacle." Back on the Defiant, Briston watched the chaos unfold from his vantage point, with the satisfaction of a man who'd just watched his least favorite uncle sit on a whoopee cushion. The Zorathians were scrambling, their defenses distracted by the vibrant explosions of color and noise orchestrated by their own misguided attempts to mirror human theatrics. "Corbin, what's the status on their fleet?" Briston asked, cracking his knuckles in anticipation. "They look like they're trying to organize a Kangal line in a hurricane," Corbin replied, eyes glinting with mischief. "They're shooting at everything and nothing. It's a beautiful disaster." Briston chuckled, a dark, low sound that reverberated through the bridge. "All right, let's move in closer. Lyra, keep feeding them holiday misinformation. Time to see how far we can stretch their sanity." The Defiant edged forward, slipping through the chaos with a grace that belied its patched-together state. Each movement was a calculated risk, every order a gamble on the fine line between victory and obliteration. On board the Zorathian flagship, Xylox's patience was finally unraveling. The human assault was relentless, their drones weaving through the Zorathian ranks like mischievous spirits, sowing confusion and panic. Arvok, Xylox growled, his voice a low rumble of thunder. What is the status of our retaliation? Our weapons systems are struggling to lock onto targets, Arvok admitted, a hint of admiration creeping into his voice despite himself. The humans have outdone themselves. Their chaos is impressive. Impressive is not the word I would use, Xylox snapped, though inwardly he couldn't help but marvel at the sheer audacity of their tactics. Initiate Plan D14. I want those humans running for the hills. Back on the Defiant, Corbin's console beeped with an incoming signal. Commander, they are switching strategies. Looks like they're going for a full offensive. Excellent, Briston said, his grin as sharp as a razor. Let them. Keep our ships nimble. We don't need to win every battle, just the last one. The Defiant danced through the melee, dodging and weaving as the Zorathians scrambled to re-establish control. Every Zorathian ship that surged forward was met with a human counterpunch. Every assault deflected with a nimble maneuver or a well-placed barrage. As the battle raged on, it became clear that the Zorathians were in over their heads. Their attempts to mimic human strategies were unraveling, every misstep compounding into a larger fiasco. What had begun as an invasion had devolved into a farce, with the UHS Defiant at the center, orchestrating the chaos with an artistry that defied reason. Commander, Lyra reported, her tone gleeful. Their flagship is pulling back. Looks like the tide's turning. Briston allowed himself a rare moment of triumph. Keep up the pressure. Don't let them regroup. We're not just fighting for our survival. We're fighting to make sure they never try this again. The Zorathians, once a feared armada, were now no more threatening than a dinner party gone horribly wrong. Their attempts at order were futile against the tide of human ingenuity, each ship falling back in disarray, a testament to the power of adaptability over brute force. On the flagship, Xylox watched the screens with a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach. This was not the glorious conquest he had envisioned. The humans had turned every assumption on its head, weaponizing their bizarre customs into a strategic nightmare. Arvok, Xylox said, his voice weary but resigned. Begin retreat procedures. We've lost this round. Arvok nodded, a touch of respect in his gaze. The humans have proven to be formidable opponents. Back on the Defiant, Briston leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile tugging at his lips. They had done it. Against all odds, they had turned back the tide of invasion, not through brute strength but through sheer guile and determination. Well done, everyone, Briston said, his voice carrying a note of genuine pride. Now let's get back to licking our wounds and waiting for the next round of madness. Corbin couldn't help but laugh, the sound a rare burst of joy amidst the chaos. You know, Commander, I think we might just survive this yet. Lyra, ever the voice of sardonic wisdom, chimed in. And if not, at least we'll go down as the most infuriating species in the galaxy. As the Defiant turned away from the battlefield, the crew took a collective breath, their spirits buoyed by the improbable victory. Against the odds, against logic, they had emerged victorious, and just for a moment the universe seemed a little less daunting. To us, Briston murmured, raising an invisible toast to the cosmos. And to the madness that's kept us alive. In the vastness of space, where the lines between chaos and order blurred into a tapestry of infinite possibilities, the UHS Defiant sailed on, its crew determined to keep fighting, keep laughing, and above all, keep surviving. They were human, after all, and if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was laughing in the face of the impossible. The aftermath of the battle left the interplanetary highway looking less like a cosmic scrapyard, and more like the scene of a really wild interstellar frat party. Scattered debris floated in the void, the remnants of Zorathian pride mingled with human ingenuity, a testament to the sheer absurdity of the whole ordeal. Commander Briston surveyed the scene from the bridge of the UHS Defiant, a smirk playing on his lips. "Looks like we're the proud owners of a brand new junkyard," he quipped, leaning back in his chair with an air of mock satisfaction. "All we need is a beware of dog sign and we're in business." Lieutenant Corbin, ever the eternal optimist, chuckled as he tapped on his battered console. "I dunno, Commander. A few no trespassing signs might help too. But hey, at least our shields held up more or less." "Yeah, more duct tape than shield, but who's counting?" Briston replied dryly. "Anything left in the coffee reserves, or did we burn through that too?" Corbin shook his head, still grinning. "Afraid it's down to just hope and nostalgia now, sir." Briston sighed theatrically and turned his attention to Lyra, their professional confuser, who was basking in the afterglow of a successful cultural assault. "So," he said, "it looks like we've actually managed to pull off this ridiculous stunt of yours." Lyra shrugged, her expression one of practiced indifference. "I always said culture was a weapon." "You just didn't believe me until now." "Color me convinced," Briston replied. "I've got to hand it to you, using our holidays as a weapon. Ingenious, who knew?" Lyra smiled sweetly. "Turns out confusion really is the best strategy." Briston nodded, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "I suppose it's time we turned our attention to the joys of interstellar diplomacy. Maybe teach those Zorathians that not every holiday involves cosmic fireworks." "Think they'll believe us?" Corbin asked, still tapping away at his console. "Not a chance," Briston said, laughing. "But it's worth a shot. Can't hurt to try peace for a change, even if it does feel like negotiating with an angry toddler wielding a blaster." Lyra snorted. "Peace? With them?" "You're an optimist." "I'm pragmatic," Briston corrected. "There's a difference." The crew of the UHS Defiant had survived another day, and in their universe that was reason enough to celebrate. As they floated through the interplanetary highway, the mood on the bridge was light, the aftermath of chaos leaving a sense of camaraderie in its wake. On the Zorathian flagship, however, General Xylox was nursing his pride alongside a rather large glass of Zorathian fire brew. His tentacles twitched with irritation as he replayed the battle in his mind, each misstep a bruise on his sizable ego. Arvok stood nearby, his expression one of cautious neutrality. "The humans," he mused aloud, "they're different, using holidays as strategic weapons." "I must admit it's unexpected," Xylox grunted, swirling his drink. "Unexpected is putting it lightly. They're downright infuriating. Who the hell decides to weaponize consumerism?" "You have to admire the creativity," Arvok said, his tone betraying a hint of admiration. "Admire?" Xylox echoed incredulously. "I'd rather strip my own scales." Arvok nearly smiled. "Perhaps there's more to the humans than we anticipated. It might be prudent to reevaluate our approach." Xylox huffed, his pride still smarting. "I suppose you're right. Maybe there's some merit in understanding these bizarre holiday customs." Back on the Defiant, Briston gathered his crew for a debriefing, the mood still light despite the weight of their recent victory. "All right, folks, let's have a chat about what just happened," he began, looking around at the assembled faces. "Lessons learned, aside from the fact that Zorathians are terrible party planners." Corbin raised his hand like a schoolboy. "Well, we learned that deception and confusion can beat brute force, and that Zorathians really don't get our holidays." "True enough," Briston agreed. "But more importantly, we learned that maybe, just maybe, we've got something to offer the galaxy beyond just blowing stuff up." Lyra leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "Who knew peace could be so entertaining?" "Watching Xylox try to figure out our holiday shenanigans was worth every sleepless night we spent planning this." Briston nodded, a genuine smile tugging at his lips. "Exactly. We've got something unique here. Our ability to adapt, to think outside the box, or the atmosphere in this case, is what keeps us going." "Think they'll want to meet for peace talks?" Corbin asked, tilting his head curiously. "I'm counting on it," Briston replied. "If there's one thing the Zorathians hate more than losing, it's not understanding something. They'll come to us, if only to make sure they're not missing out on the next big holiday assault. Lyra chuckled darkly. Getting them to sit down at the negotiation table might be the hardest part, but if anyone can do it, it's us. The crew laughed, their spirits buoyed by their recent success. Against the backdrop of their patched-up ship and the floating remnants of the Zorathian armada, they felt the first stirrings of something they hadn't dared to hope for, the possibility of peace. As the Defiant drifted through the slowly clearing highway, Briston pondered the future. Could holidays and chaos really be the bridge between two warring species? In the grand scheme of things, it seemed ludicrous. But then again, so did a lot of things that had somehow worked out in their favor. Meanwhile, on the Zorathian flagship, General Xylox was coming to a similar conclusion. Though the sting of defeat was fresh, he couldn't deny the cunning of his human adversaries. Their unpredictability, their relentless creativity, it was maddening, yes, but also begrudgingly impressive. Perhaps we need to adapt, Xylox finally admitted, his voice a low rumble. If we can't beat them with force, maybe we can learn from them. Arvok nodded, his expression thoughtful. Understanding their culture might be a step towards finding common ground. If they can weaponize holidays, maybe we can find a way to weaponize understanding. Xylox hesitated, then nodded slowly. The thought of sitting down at a table with the humans was unsettling, but the alternative, endless cycles of misunderstanding and conflict, was far less appealing. Back on the Defiant, Briston leaned against the command console, watching the stars drift lazily by. You know, he mused aloud, if someone had told me a year ago that we'd be using fireworks and gift-giving as weapons, I'd have called them crazy. Yeah, Corbin agreed, joining him. But then, who'd have thought wrapping paper would become a strategic asset? True, Briston laughed. Maybe it's time we start thinking of ourselves not just as warriors, but as diplomats. Diplomats, Lyra interjected with a snort. I didn't sign up to be a diplomat, Briston shrugged. Neither did I, but here we are making it work. The bridge fell into a comfortable silence, the crew members lost in their own thoughts. For the first time in what felt like eons, the universe stretched out before them not as a series of battles to be fought, but as a canvas for potential and change. Hey, Commander, Corbin said suddenly, breaking the silence. Do you think peace with the Zorathians is actually possible? Briston considered this, his expression thoughtful. Possible? Maybe not, but worth trying for. Absolutely. Crazy, Lyra muttered, though there was a hint of a smile on her lips. Crazy's what keeps us alive, Briston replied, looking out at the stars. And what gives us a fighting chance? The UHS Defiant sailed on, a beacon of human adaptability and irreverent hope amidst the vastness of space. They had forged a path through chaos, not with superior firepower, but with ingenuity and sheer stubbornness. As they drifted away from the battlefield, the crew couldn't help but feel a strange sense of optimism, a belief that even amidst the darkness of the cosmos, there was a light to be found. It wasn't just about survival anymore.